You had your chance to get married. You wasted it. $15,000, Vera. The least you can do is let your sister have what you threw away." My mother said that with the serving spoon still in her hand. Green beans? She had made green beans with the almonds on top, the way she does when she wants the table to feel like a holiday, and she said it in the same voice she uses to ask if anyone wants more bread. Nobody moved. My Aunt Loretta stopped chewing. My sister June went the color of the tablecloth. Her fiancé Miles looked at his plate like there was something written on it that could save him. And I sat there with my fork in the air and understood something I should have understood years earlier. She had rehearsed it. That sentence had been said out loud somewhere before it got to me. In her car, probably. In the shower. It came out too clean. My name is Vera. I'm 34 years old, and for most of my adult life, my family has treated my bank account as a shared utility, like the water heater in the basement. Something you don't think about until you want it, and then you're annoyed it isn't already running. I want to be careful here, because the easy version of this story is the one where my mother is a monster. She isn't. That's the part that took me longest to accept. Patrice Duhamel is not a monster. She is a woman who has been keeping a ledger her entire life, in her head, in a currency only she can see, and she has decided, sincerely, all the way down, that I am behind on my payments. That's worse than a monster. A monster you can just leave. Let me tell you what the $15,000 was. 2 years before that dinner, I was supposed to get married. His name was Owen. It doesn't matter much what he was like, and I've noticed that when I tell this story, people want to know. They want a villain with a face, and I don't have one to give them. He was kind in the ordinary way. He put the milk back with the label turned out. He left me 7 weeks before the wedding, in a parking garage, sitting in his car with the engine off. Level 3. I remember that because the sign was directly in front of the windshield, orange numerals on a green square, and I looked at it the entire time he talked. We'd just come from dinner. There was a container of leftovers in my lap and I could feel the warmth of it through my coat, going gradually cold, and I kept holding it because putting it down would have meant something. He said he wasn't sure. He said it a few different ways. He said he'd been not sure for a while. And I did the thing I still think about at 2 in the morning. I started negotiating. I said we could move the date. I said we could do it smaller, we could do the courthouse, we could wait a year. And each thing I offered, I watched him not take, and I kept offering anyway, faster, the way you throw furniture off a boat. Then I looked at the back seat. His gym bag was there. He kept it in the trunk. Always, for 4 years, in the trunk. It was on the back seat because the trunk had something in it, and I understood in one clean piece, without being told, that he had already moved out of somewhere or into somewhere else, and that this conversation had a schedule, and I was the last item on it. That's when I stopped talking. He said, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm sorry," which is a sentence that means nothing if you say it more than 3 times. I got out of the car with the leftovers still in my hand. I walked to my own car 2 rows over and I sat in it for a while with the ring on because I hadn't yet learned what you do with a ring. There's no procedure, nobody tells you. You just have this expensive object on your body that has stopped being true. I drove home. I put the leftovers in the fridge. I ate them 4 days later, standing up because I couldn't stand the idea of throwing food away. 7 weeks out, everything is already paid for. The venue was Ash Grove. If you're from around here, you know it. The long white building with the stone terrace out back. The oak trees, they light from below so the branches look like veins. It's the place people around here get married when they want their pictures to look like a magazine. It is not a place people like my family get married. That was the whole point of it if I'm being honest, and I'm trying to be. The deposit was $15,000, non-refundable. I knew that when I signed. What I didn't know until I called them crying on a Tuesday with my ring still on because I hadn't figured out what you do with a ring was that non-refundable and non-transferable are 2 different things. I made that call from the stairwell at work. Tuesday, 10 in the morning, between the 4th and 5th floors, where the light is bad and nobody goes. I had the contract open on my phone and I had the clause highlighted in yellow, and I had planned out what I was going to say so that I could get through it without my voice doing anything. I got about 6 words in. "Hi, I'm calling about the June 14th. I need to cancel the," and then nothing came out. I stood in a concrete stairwell with my hand over my mouth, making no sound at all, which is a thing I didn't know a person could do. The woman on the other end waited. She didn't feel it. She just waited, and after a while she said, "Take your time, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere." Her name was Bernadette. She had been at every single meeting. Every tasting, every walkthrough, every conversation about whether the ceremony chairs should be white or the natural wood, and my mother had been at every one of those too. That was the year my mother and I were closer than we had ever been in our lives. She drove out to Ash Grove with me 11 times. I counted later. 11. She brought a binder. She had opinions about the linens and she wanted the oaklet from below, and she cried in the parking lot the day we picked the date, and I remember thinking, with a kind of stupid gratitude, oh, so this is what it takes. Bernadette knew her by name. Bernadette knew her coffee order. That matters. I need you to hold on to that, because in about a year and a half it becomes the whole story. On the phone that Tuesday, Bernadette said, "Honey, we don't give it back. I'm sorry, we just don't. It's how the contract is. But we don't take it either. It stays on your file. You come back whenever you're ready. Any date we've got open, and it's yours." I said thank you. I said it about 9 times. She said, "I'm putting a note on it right now so nobody bothers you about it." And she did. There was a note. I saw it eventually in a PDF in a font too small to read on a phone. Client credit, hold indefinitely, do not contact. And then I never went back. For 2 years, that $15,000 sat in a file at Ash Grove with my name on it. My mother knew that. Everybody knew that. It was a fact about me, the way people know somebody has a bad knee. So when my mother stood at the head of that table and told me that the least I could do was let my sister have what I threw away, she wasn't asking me to write a check. She was telling me she'd already found a use for the wreckage. I didn't know that yet. That's the part I want you to hold on to. At that dinner, I still thought this was about money. I put my fork down. I remember doing it carefully because my hands weren't steady and I didn't want anyone to hear the fork hit the plate. "No," I said. That was all. 1 syllable. And then I picked the fork back up and I ate the green beans, because they were good and because I have learned that the fastest way to lose an argument in my family is to stop eating. My mother laughed. Not a real laugh. The short one, the one that's punctuation. "No," she repeated. "She says no. Mom." June's voice was very small. "It's fine. We don't need—" "It's not fine." My mother set the spoon down on the good tablecloth, which she never does, which is how everyone at that table knew we had crossed into something. "June, you don't get to be small about this. You are getting married. Once. In your life. And your sister is going to sit there in a $400 coat and tell you no." It was $120, the coat. I bought it at an outlet in February. I've thought about that a lot since. How she assigned it a price out loud in front of my aunt, and how nobody at the table thought that was a strange thing to do. Aunt Loretta cleared her throat and said something about the weather. Here's what I need to explain, and I don't love explaining it because it makes me sound like a certain kind of person. I keep everything. Every receipt, every email, every confirmation number, every text thread, every photograph of every document I've ever signed. I have folders inside folders inside folders. When I pay for something for my family, and I have paid for a great many things for my family, I photograph the receipt before I hand it over, and I do it in the bathroom or the car so nobody sees me do it because I know how it looks. It looks like distrust. It is distrust. I'm not going to dress it up. I started when I was 15. My mother kept the grocery money in a white envelope in the 3rd drawer down, under the dish towels. Everyone knew it was there. It was that kind of house. And one day in October there was $140 in that envelope, and then there was not. And my mother stood me in the kitchen and asked me where it went. I said I didn't take it. She asked again. She asked for 2 days. Not shouting. My mother has never been a shouter, and I want you to understand that because people always imagine screaming. She just asked, calmly. At breakfast, in the car, through the bathroom door, "Vera, where did it go?" Like water finding a crack, and I could not prove it. That's the thing. There is no way to prove you didn't do something. I stood in that kitchen at 15 years old with my whole chest on fire, and the only thing I had was my word. And my word was not enough, and I watched my mother look at me and decide. It was my father. He told me 11 years later, in a hospital parking lot, smoking a cigarette he wasn't supposed to have. He'd taken it for a bet on a horse, and he'd been too much of a coward to say so while it mattered. His name was Hal. He died 3 years ago, and I loved him, and he was weak, and both of those things stay true no matter how many times I turn them over. By the time he told me, it didn't help. The habit was already grown into me like a root through a foundation. From 15 years old, I have kept the paper, all of it. Because I learned young that in my family, the truth is not what happened. The truth is what somebody can put on the table. So, that's my great secret weapon. A woman who's afraid to throw away receipts. I'm telling you now because I want to be fair to you. I want you to know I had it the whole time, sitting in my hand like a card I didn't know was a card. The dinner ended the way those dinners always end, coffee that nobody drinks. My mother being extravagantly warm to Miles, asking about his job, laughing at things that weren't funny, performing the version of our family that we keep in the front room for guests. At the door, she kissed my cheek. She did. She put both hands on my face and she said, "Think about it, sweetheart. That's all I'm asking. Just think about it." And then, still holding my face, "Your father would have wanted this. I want to be very precise about what that was. That was not grief. My mother did not miss my father when she said that. She was reaching for the heaviest object within arm's length, and it happened to be a dead man. I drove home. 26 minutes. I didn't put music on. At a red light on Fulton, I did something I do more than I would like to admit. I took out my wallet, and behind the cards there's a slot that doesn't hold anything useful, and in that slot there is a square of fabric about the size of a stamp. Ivory silk. Dupioni, if you want the word for it. It has a slub running through it, a little ridge you can feel with your thumbnail, and the light catches it in a way that isn't quite white and isn't quite gold. It's a swatch from a dress I never put on in a room with anyone else in it. The seamstress gave me 3 of them back when we were deciding, so I could carry them around and look at them in different light, in the office, outside, at night. She said light lies about fabric. I remember thinking that was a beautiful thing to say about a job that's mostly pins. I threw the other 2 away. This one I kept, and I have carried it for 2 years in a slot behind my debit card, and I have never once been able to tell you what I'm keeping it for. Light turned green. I put it back. The text started at 10,040. "I hope you know how you made your sister feel tonight. She cried in the car. I want you to know that. You've always been like this, even as a girl, cold." Then, at 11,522, softer, which is the part I've never been able to fully forgive, "I love you. I just don't understand you. Good night, sweetheart." I didn't answer any of them. I put the phone face down on the nightstand and lay in the dark doing the arithmetic that I have done 1,000 times. The arithmetic of how much it would cost, in dollars, to make it stop, 15,000. I had it. That was the humiliating part. I could have written the check that night and been in bed by 11. And I want to tell you, I said no out of strength. The truth is, I said no because I was tired. That's all it was that night, not principle, fatigue. The last thing I thought before I fell asleep was that at least it was over. She'd asked, I'd said no, and now there would be 6 weeks of cold silence and then a birthday, and then we'd all pretend. That's what I believed. That the worst thing that happened that night was a sentence about green beans. My sister called me at 70:40 the next morning. June doesn't call. June texts. And she texts in 3-part fragments with a photo attached. In our entire adult lives, I could count the times my sister had called me before 9 in the morning on one hand and have fingers left over. I picked up on the second ring. I could hear her breathing before I heard anything else. That fast, shallow, top-of-the-chest breathing that people do when they're trying to hold their face still. June? Vera. A long, wet inhale. Vera, I need you to tell me something, and I need you to not lie to protect me. I sat up. My feet found the cold part of the floor. Okay. I was at Ash Grove. Her voice cracked straight down the middle of the word. I went to sign the linens. And Bernadette? She stopped, started again. Bernadette hugged me. She hugged me, Vera, and she said, June. She said it was so lovely that we were able to use your credit. The room went very quiet. Not the room, me. She said Mom came in March. 6 weeks before that dinner, 6 weeks before my mother stood at the head of the table with a serving spoon in her hand and asked me in front of my aunt to be generous. Vera, June was crying properly now. Vera, say something. She said Mom signed for it. She said Mom signed your name. Before we go on, if this story is pulling you in, take a second to subscribe. It's the only way to know when the next one goes up. And if someone in your family has ever treated your money like it was already theirs, tell me in the comments. I read them. Now let me tell you what happened next. I don't remember getting dressed. I remember being in the car with my coat over pajamas and my keys in my hand and no memory of the stairs. And I remember thinking, very clearly in the voice I use for work, don't call her yet. Don't call your mother yet. You call her when you have the paper. That's who I am. I want you to see it. My sister was falling apart on the phone and some cold clerk in the back of my head was already filing. June was in the parking lot at Ash Grove. She hadn't left. She'd been sitting in her car for an hour and 11 minutes with the linen samples on the passenger seat, 3 squares of cloth in a little envelope, and when I knocked on the window, she jumped like I'd fired a gun. She got out and she said, I didn't know. I know. Vera, I didn't know. June. I know. She's 29 and she cries like she's 9, with her whole face, no dignity, both hands up. I stood in a parking lot with my sister's forehead against my collarbone and over her shoulder. I could see the oak trees, bare that time of year, and the little black spotlights at the base of each trunk, aimed up. I had picked those. 2 years ago I had stood on that grass with a binder and said, "I want the light coming up from underneath." "They're going to be lit," June said into my coat. "For the ceremony, she wants them lit. I know she does." Here's what I did not do. I did not walk into that building and ask Bernadette what the hell had happened. I thought about it. I got as far as the door. I didn't, because of a thing I learned at 15 years old, standing in a kitchen. The moment you accuse someone out loud, the story becomes about the accusation. It stops being about what happened and starts being about how you behaved when you found out. And my family is extraordinarily good at that trade. They will take your worst 30 seconds and hold it up next to somebody's worst 10 years and ask you why you're being like this. So I drove home and I opened my laptop and I wrote an email. It took me 40 minutes to write 6 sentences because every version I deleted had temperature in it. "Good morning, Bernadette. I hope you're well. I'm reaching out about the event credit held under my name from June 2023. I'm doing some paperwork on my end and I'd like a complete copy of my file for my records, contract, correspondence, and any account activity. Whatever you have. No rush. Thank you for everything, always. Vera. Whatever you have. No rush." I have never in my life written a sentence with more pressure behind it than "no rush." She answered in 19 minutes. That's the part that still sits strangely with me. 19 minutes, cheerful, 3 exclamation points, so lovely to hear from you and so exciting about your sister. And attached to it, a PDF, 41 pages, everything, because Bernadette had absolutely no idea she was handing me a bomb. Why would she? In her world, nothing had gone wrong. In her world, a nice family was having a nice wedding. I made coffee before I opened it. I want to be honest about that too. I stood in my kitchen and waited for the machine to finish because I knew that whatever was in that file, I was only going to get to read it for the first time once. Pages 1 through 9 were my old contract. My signature at the bottom of every page, small and tight, the way I sign. I've signed my name the same way since high school, and the V is open at the top, 2 straight strokes that don't meet. Page 10 was the note. In 8-point type at the bottom of an account summary, client credit, hold indefinitely. Do not contact. And a line struck through it. Ballpoint. Somebody had crossed it out by hand and initialed it. Page 11 was the form. It's called a credit assignment authorization. It's 1 page. It is the least dramatic looking piece of paper you have ever seen in your life. A logo, a grid of boxes, a little illustrated oak leaf in the corner. Let me read you what it said. I've read it so many times I could recite it in my sleep, but I'm going to read it because I think you should hear the actual words. Credit holder of record, Vera Duhamel. Amount on account, $15,000 and 0 cents. Transfer to event, Duhamel Prescott, Saturday, October 18th. Reason for transfer, family, immediate. Date of request, March 4th. March 4th. 6 weeks and 2 days before my mother put both hands on my face at the front door and told me to think about it. 6 weeks before she said the least I could do, then the contact block. 3 lines to be filled in by the credit holder. Phone. That's my mother's cell number. I know it the way I know my own. Email. That's my mother's email, the one with her birth year in it. Mailing address. My mother's house. I want to stop there for a second because when people hear this story, they focus on the signature. And the signature is not the worst thing on that page. A forged signature can be a moment. A person can lose their mind for 90 seconds and scribble a name and regret it for the rest of their life. I have room in me for that. I'd have found room. But you don't put your own phone number in the credit holder's contact field in a moment. You do that because you have thought about what happens next. You do that so the confirmation email doesn't come to me. You do that so that when the venue calls to verify, and they did call, it's in the file, confirmation call placed, spoke what client, verified. The phone that rings is the one in your pocket. She answered that call. Somebody at Ashgrove dialed a number and said, "Ms. Duhamel?" And my mother said yes. And then, at the bottom, on a line printed with the words, "Signature of credit holder, Vera Duhamel," in my mother's handwriting. She didn't even try. That's what I keep coming back to. She has seen me sign my name 10,000 times, and she didn't practice, she didn't trace it, she didn't hold it up to a window. She just wrote my name in her own hand with her own loops, the way she writes a grocery list, and the V curls closed at the top like a shell. My mother makes a closed V. I make an open one. $15,000 turned on a quarter-inch of ink. I sat at my kitchen table and I looked at that page for a long time, and what I felt was not what I expected to feel. It wasn't rage. Rage came later and it came cold. What I felt at that table was something closer to embarrassment. The specific crawling embarrassment of being 15 again in a kitchen with a white envelope, except this time I had it. This time it was in my hands. 15 years of keeping every scrap of paper like some kind of squirrel with a personality disorder, and here was the one piece that made it all make sense. I photographed it. Of course I did. Then I emailed it to myself. Then I printed 2 copies and put one in the fireproof box. Then I drove to a storage unit on Ferris Road because I needed to check one thing. My father died 3 years ago and I kept 4 boxes. My mother kept the house and I kept 4 boxes, and honestly that division tells you most of what you need to know about our family. Hal's boxes are a mess. Fishing licenses, a shoebox of Polaroids in no order, a watch that doesn't run, and in the third box, in a brown paper envelope soft as cloth from handling, 6 photographs I'd looked at maybe twice in my life. The one I wanted was on top. Courthouse steps, concrete, a bad railing, somebody's car in the corner of the frame. My father in a suit that fits him wrong across the shoulders, 23 years old, grinning like an idiot with his tie already loose. And my mother, she's wearing an ivory dress that doesn't fit her. It's too long. You can see it's been pinned at the hem. You can see the pins if you look, 3 of them catching the light along the bottom. Her hands are folded in front of her stomach, both hands flat, the way women hold their hands when they're trying to make a shape disappear. She's 4 months pregnant with me. There are 5 people in that photograph. Her mother isn't one of them. I sat on the floor of a storage unit in a coat over pajamas, and I did the math I had never once bothered to do. She was 19. The dress was borrowed. I found out later it was her cousin's, worn twice before her and once after. There were no flowers. There was no dinner. They went to a friendly's afterward. My father used to say that. He used to say it like a joke. Your mother had a hot fudge sundae on her wedding day, and she cried into it, and everybody at the table would laugh, and I laughed too. For 30 years, I laughed at that. Nobody lit any oak trees for Patrice Duhamel. And I understood her. That's the thing I have to tell you, and I hate it. Sitting on that concrete floor, I understood my mother completely, that she has spent her whole life carrying an unpaid invoice, that she genuinely believes the world owes her one wedding, and that somewhere in the accounting she keeps behind her eyes, I am the reason she never got it. I'm the shape she was hiding with her hands. So when a marriage of mine fell apart and left $15,000 sitting unused in a file at the most beautiful venue in the county, to her, that wasn't my grief. That was the invoice finally coming due. Understanding somebody is not the same as forgiving them. I want to be very clear about that, because people mix those up. I understood her perfectly. It changed nothing. If anything, it made it worse, because it meant she hadn't done it in a moment of weakness. She'd done it in a moment of justice. June wanted to burn it down that night. She was at my apartment by 7, still in her work clothes, and she'd worked herself into a place I'd never seen her in. I'm calling Miles's mother. I'm calling everybody. We cancel it. We do the courthouse. I don't care, Vera. I don't want it. I don't want any of it. Sit down. How are you calm? I'm not calm. Sit down. She sat. I told her no. Not no forever. No now. And I told her why, and I'm going to tell you why, because this is the only part of this whole story where I think I was actually smart instead of just wounded. If we canceled that wedding on a Tuesday night in private over the phone, my mother writes the story. She's been writing the story our whole lives. By Thursday, it's Vera couldn't stand to see her sister happy. By Sunday, it's she's never been the same since Owen. We've all been so worried about her. By Christmas, it's a thing people say gently, with their heads tilted, and there is no document in the world that survives a tilted head. 40 people were going to be standing on that terrace at the rehearsal dinner. 40 people who had spent 7 months hearing my mother tell them she was paying for this wedding herself. I wasn't going to argue with her. I was going to let the paper do it, in a room where the story couldn't be rewritten afterward. June looked at me for a long moment, and then she said quietly, "You're kind of terrifying." I know. I called our Aunt Loretta on the Wednesday. I had a reason ready. I was going to ask what time the rehearsal dinner started, which is a thing I could have found in a group text in 4 seconds, and I think on some level I knew exactly what I was doing. Loretta is my mother's older sister, and she has never in her life gotten off a phone call in under 35 minutes. She talked about her hip. She talked about a neighbor's tree. And then, in the middle of a sentence about parking, she said, "And I have to tell you again, honey, I think what you did was just beautiful." I said, "What I did? The wedding, sweetheart. Giving them your money from before." Her voice went soft and careful, the way people's voices go when they think they're stepping around something. "Your mother told all of us, back in the spring. She said you came to her and you said you wanted June to have it, that you were finally ready to let it go." I stood in my own hallway and did not say anything. "And I'll tell you," Loretta said, "I cried. I did. Because we all know that was a hard time for you. And to turn around and do that for your sister." Patrice says she couldn't be prouder. I asked her as evenly as I could when my mother had told her that. "Easter," she said. "Easter, at the table, in front of everybody. That's when I remembered it. I was there. I was at that table." And I remember Loretta getting up during dessert and coming around behind my chair and putting both hands on my shoulders and saying, close to my ear, "Your mother told us what you did." And I remember thinking she meant my father's headstone, which I'd paid for that February. I remember smiling. I remember saying thank you. I had sat in that chair and thanked her for it. That was the moment, not the form, not the signature, not the phone number in the contact field. The moment was standing in my hallway with the phone against my ear, realizing that for 4 months my entire family had been carrying around a version of me in their heads that I had unknowingly nodded along to. A healed, generous Vera. A woman who walked into her mother's kitchen and offered up the last thing she had left from the worst year of her life, and smiled about it. My mother hadn't only taken $15,000. She'd taken the story, and she'd cast me in it, and I had played the part at Easter without knowing I was on a stage. Loretta was still talking about parking. I went to see my mother on the Thursday, alone. Her kitchen, that kitchen, with the third drawer down. I put the copy on the counter and I didn't say anything. I just put it down and stepped back and let her look at it. She looked at it for about 4 seconds. Then she picked up her tea. "Where did you get that? That's your question? It's a question. Mom." My voice did not shake. I've thought about that a lot since. It did not shake. "You signed my name." And she said, with her tea in both hands at her own counter, in a robe with a coffee stain on the sleeve, in the mildest voice you have ever heard in your life, "It was dead money, Vera." It was dead money. She set the cup down. Sitting there. 2 years. Doing nothing for anybody. You were never going to use it. You know you were never going to use it. And your sister found somebody who stayed, and there was $15,000 rotting in a drawer at that place, and here she did something with her hand, a small open gesture, generous, like a woman describing a garden. I resurrected it. I said, "You committed fraud. And my mother, and I want you to hear this exactly, because it is the truest sentence anyone in my family has ever said out loud." My mother tipped her head and said, "I'm your mother. It isn't fraud, it's family." Then she asked me if I wanted tea. I said no. I picked up the paper because I wasn't leaving it there, and at the door she said the thing that decided everything. She said, "You'll be at the rehearsal dinner, won't you? People will talk if you're not." And I said yes. June came over the night before. She didn't call first. She showed up at 9 with her hair still wet and sat on the end of my couch with her shoes on, which she never does. And for about 10 minutes we didn't talk about it at all. We talked about the seating chart. We talked about whether Miles's uncle drinks. Then she said, looking at the floor, "Are you going to ruin it?" I didn't answer right away because she deserved better than a fast answer. "Because I know what she did," June said. "I know. And I'm not... Vera, I'm not asking you to let it go. I would never ask you that. But it's my..." Her mouth went unsteady. "It's the only one I get. I know. So are you," I said. "I'm not going to raise my voice. Not once. I'm not going to say your name or Miles's name, and I'm not going to say one word about you. Nothing that happens tomorrow is going to be about you." She waited. And I'm going to hand a piece of paper to the woman who runs that building in front of the family and ask her to check one thing. That's it. That's the whole plan. That's it. That's it. June wiped her face with the back of her wrist. Then she asked me the question I've thought about more than anything else anyone said to me that entire year. "What do you actually want to happen?" And I sat with that because I wanted to give her something true instead of something that sounded good. "I want her to have to say it out loud," I said. "In a room. In front of people who can hear her. That's all. I don't want her arrested. I don't want her ruined. I don't want anybody screaming. I want her to stand in that room and say what she did with her own mouth one time, where she can't take it back later and turn it into a story about me." June nodded slowly. She won't say it, she said. She will. How do you know? Because she doesn't think she did anything wrong, I said. That's the whole thing, June. She's not going to deny it. She's going to explain it, and she's going to expect them to agree with her. My sister looked at me for a long moment. Then she put her head on my shoulder and stayed there for a while, and neither of us said anything else, and at some point I realized she'd fallen asleep like that, at 29 years old, the night before her rehearsal dinner, with her shoes still on. They lit the oaks. That's the first thing I saw coming up the drive. 6 trees along the terrace with the little black spotlights aimed up into them, so the branches went white and the shadows ran up instead of down, and the whole thing looked like the inside of something rather than the outside. I had stood on that grass with a binder and asked for that. I parked at the far end of the lot on purpose. I sat in the car for 4 minutes, and I'm going to tell you exactly what was in my bag, because I want you to understand how boring it looked. A folder, manila, 9 pages, clipped. On the tab, in pencil, 1 word, Ashgrove, not a speech, not a phone with a recording on it. A folder from an office supply store that cost 39 cents, 41 people. I counted them at some point, which tells you something about my state of mind. Miles's parents, both grandmothers, cousins. I hadn't seen since my father's funeral. Loretta in green holding a clutch with both hands. June at the far end of the terrace in a white dress that wasn't the dress, laughing at something, doing the thing she does where she touches her collarbone when she's nervous. And my mother, moving through all of it like weather. I want to be fair, she was magnificent that night. Genuinely, she remembered names. She got Miles's grandmother a chair with a back on it before anyone had to ask. She had done her hair and she looked lovely, and she was, for 2 hours, the exact woman she has always believed herself to be. And I stood by the railing with a paper cup of white wine and watched her be that woman and felt something in my chest that I still don't have a name for. She hugged me when I came in front of Loretta. You came, she said. I knew you'd come. Then Adair arrived, and I knew we were going to get through this. Adair runs Ashgrove, not the coordinator. The coordinator is Bernadette, and Bernadette is lovely and would have folded like a napkin. Adair is the general manager, a small, precise woman in her 50s who wears her reading glasses on a chain and who I had met exactly twice, both times 2 years ago, both times about money. She works every rehearsal dinner. She told me that once, years back. She said the rehearsal is where you find out what the family actually is. I waited. That was the hardest part. Not the folder, the waiting. I let them do the toasts. Miles's father spoke, then Loretta, badly and at length. And then, around 9 o'clock, with the oaks going white behind her, my mother picked up a glass and tapped it with a ring, and the terrace went quiet. She talked for maybe 3 minutes. She talked about June as a little girl. She talked about my father, and she cried, and it was real crying. I want to be clear about that. My mother's grief for my father is one of the only uncomplicated things about her. And then she said it. She said, I want everybody to know that this venue, this night, all of this, I made this happen. I have worked very hard for a long time to be able to give my daughter the wedding I never had. 41 people applauded. I put my wine down on the railing. I want to tell you that I felt powerful walking across that terrace. I didn't. I felt like I was made of wet paper. My legs did it without me. There is a specific horror in walking towards something you have planned for 11 days, and the horror is that it turns out to be extremely small. 9 sheets of paper and about 6 seconds of floor. I didn't go to my mother. I went to Adair, who was standing by the doors with her hands folded, and I said, quietly enough that only the nearest table could hear, I'm sorry to do this here. I need you to verify 1 document from my file. She looked at the folder. She looked at my face. And Adair, God bless her forever, did not ask a single question. She took her glasses off the chain and she put them on and she said, come inside. And I said, no, here. That was the only cruel thing I did all night. I want to own it. I could have gone inside. I chose the terrace. Because inside is a room where my mother gets to explain things afterward. Adair opened the folder on a high-top table with a votive candle on it. Page 1, the old contract, my signature at the bottom. Page 2, the account note. Page 3, the credit assignment authorization, March 4th. The terrace had gone the particular kind of quiet where people are pretending not to look. My mother came over. Of course she did. She came over smiling with her glass still in her hand, and she said, Vera? Honey, what are you doing? Adair said, Ma'am, 1 moment, ma'am, to my mother. On a terrace she'd been running like a monarch for 2 hours. Then Adair looked up and asked me the question I had been waiting 11 days to be asked. Miss Duhamel, you did not authorize this transfer? No. Did you sign this form? No. And she nodded once and did the most ordinary thing in the world. She reached into the little leather folio she carries and she took out a blank place card, one of the cream ones with the oak leaf printed in the corner, from a stack of 40 on the table beside her. And she set it down in front of my mother with a pen on top of it. And she said, Mrs. Duhamel, would you write your name for me, please? That's it. That's the whole thing. That's what it came down to after 2 years and $15,000 and a white envelope in a kitchen drawer when I was 15 years old. Would you write your name for me, please? My mother did not pick up the pen. She stood there with her wine in her hand and 41 people watching, and she looked at that blank card the way you'd look at something moving under a sheet. And she did not pick up the pen, and every second she didn't pick it up was louder than anything I could have shouted. Loretta said, Patrice? Nothing. Patrice, what is she? You said Vera gave it to you. And my mother turned to her sister, and I watched her make a decision, and she made the decision I had promised June she would make, she explained. It was dead money. Loud enough for the whole terrace, not ashamed, impatient. It had been sitting in a drawer at this place for 2 years doing nothing for anybody, because she was never going to use it, and everybody in this family knows she was never going to use it. And her sister found a man who stayed. She turned to look at me, and there was a kind of appeal in it, like she still thought this was salvageable, like she was still about to be agreed with. I didn't take anything from you. There was nothing left to take. I resurrected it. Nobody said anything. That's the part I'd never have been able to write in advance. There was no gasp. Nobody dropped a glass. 41 people simply stood on a terrace under 6 lit oak trees and looked at their shoes, and my mother stood in the middle of them waiting for a single person to nod. And then Miles's mother, a woman I had spoken maybe 9 sentences to in my life, said very gently, Patrice, you signed her name. And my mother said, I'm her mother. It isn't fraud. It's family. She said it out loud, in a room, in front of people who could hear her. That was all I ever wanted. Adair took the folder inside and came back 11 minutes later. And what she said quietly, to my mother at the edge of the terrace, and I only heard it because I was standing close enough to be a witness, which was the point of the entire evening. The transfer was void. A credit assignment with an unverified signature isn't a transaction. It's nothing. It never happened. And Ashgrove would be reversing it in the morning. Which left the second thing. Somebody still had to pay for a wedding that was 31 days away. And on page 29 of that 41-page PDF, I'd read it the previous Tuesday, sitting on my kitchen floor at 1 in the morning. There is a new event contract for Duhamel Prescott October 18th, and in the box marked responsible party for payment, in her own handwriting, with her own close curling V, is the name Patrice Duhamel. She'd signed that one honestly, $15,000, the same number. It just changed which side of the page it was on. I'd known that since Tuesday. I want to be honest with you about that too, because it's the coldest thing I've ever done and I'm not going to pretend it was an accident. I knew, walking onto that terrace, exactly what voiding the transfer would do. I didn't do it to get my money back. There was no money to get back. That $15,000 had been gone since the day Owen sat in a parking garage with his gym bag on the back seat. I did it so that the invoice would finally have her name on it. Adair asked me, before I left, whether I intended to make a report. She said it carefully, the way you'd offer someone a coat. I said no. And I've been asked about that 100 times since. By June, by Miles, by a lawyer I paid for 1 hour and never called again. Everyone assumes it was mercy. It wasn't mercy. I thought about it for 9 days. Here's why. The second my mother becomes a woman being prosecuted by her own daughter, she stops being a woman who forged a signature. She becomes a martyr, and my family is built for martyrs. They'd have fed on it for 20 years, and every single person on that terrace would have slowly, gently started saying, well, but $15,000, and to do that to your own mother. I didn't want her punished. I wanted her accurate. A criminal case would have given her a story. A debt just gives her a balance. June and Miles did not get married at Ashgrove. They didn't cancel out of spite, and my sister spent about 2 weeks in a state I wouldn't wish on anybody before she made the call. What she said to me was, I can't stand under those trees, Vera. Every photograph I'd have for the rest of my life would have the worst year of your life in the background. They got married in April, in the side garden of the house Miles grew up in, with 31 people in folding chairs and a friend of theirs who plays cello badly. It rained for 6 minutes in the middle, and everybody just stayed. My sister wore a dress that cost $400, and she has never looked like that before or since. I paid for the flowers. She asked me to. That's different, and both of us knew it was different, and neither of us said so. Our mother came. She sat in the second row. She has a payment plan with Ashgrove, $416 a month for 3 years, and she has never once mentioned it to me, and I have never once mentioned it to her, and that arrangement is, I think, the most honest relationship we have ever had. Loretta doesn't talk about Easter anymore. The last thing. At the rehearsal dinner, after Adair went inside with the folder and my mother went to the far end of the terrace and stood by herself, I walked down off the flagstones onto the grass in my good shoes to where the oaks are. You can hear those spotlights if you get close enough. They hum. I took out my wallet, and behind the debit card, in the slot that doesn't hold anything useful, there was a square of ivory silk about the size of a stamp, with a slub running through it that you can feel with your thumbnail. 2 years I carried that. And I told you at the beginning that I could never explain what I was keeping it for. I know now. I was keeping it so that one day I'd have something to put down. I crouched at the base of the tree I'd picked out with the binder in my hands when I was 32 years old and still engaged. And I set that scrap of silk in the wet grass at the foot of the light, and I left it there, and I walked back up to the terrace and I asked my sister if she wanted a ride home. So here's what I'd ask you. Not whether I should have called the police. Not whether my mother deserved worse or better or nothing at all. You'll decide that on your own, and you should. What I'd ask is this. There's something you're still carrying. You know what it is. Some version of a story where you're the one who owes, some debt nobody ever wrote down, but everybody in your family seems to know the balance of. Maybe it's a person's name you flinch at. Maybe it's a receipt you kept. Ask yourself when you last checked whether it's still true, because mine wasn't. Mine hadn't been true for 2 years, and I carried it in my wallet anyway, right behind the card I use every day, and I would have carried it for the rest of my life if somebody hadn't reached into my grief and tried to spend it. The trees are still lit out there. They light them every Saturday, for whoever's next. I hope it's somebody who chose it. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this story moved you, leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss the one still coming. And tell me, what would you like the next story to be about? I'll be reading you in the comments.